Hi everyone, welcome to Lecture 10 Part 1 on projections and regularities. The objectives for this video are the following. So after watching, everyone should be able to, number 1, illustrate projections and regularities using examples. Number 2, define this thing called Rule S. And number 3, explain using the idea of a projective regularity why Rule S cannot be adequate for constructing a system of scientific inductive logic. So we're going to talk now for the next 3 lecture videos about the problem of constructing a system of scientific inductive logic. This lecture will be a bit shorter than the other 2, and in this one we'll introduce these things called regularities and projections, which we'll take forward into the following 2 lectures. So consider the following argument. It says all ravens observed in the past have been black, therefore the next observed raven will be black. Now we're interested in being able to construct a scientific inductive logic, that is, to specify the rules for assigning inductive probabilities to inductive arguments in the right way. It makes sense then to look at a typical inductively strong argument and try and spot any feature or characteristic of it that we might be able to generalize into a rule. Now, scientific inductive logic assigns a high inductive probability to this argument, and we say that it projects an observed regularity into the future. It's a projection because the conclusion talks about something in the future, and the regularity is that ravens have always been black in the past. So here's a crude suggestion we might make. Why don't we construct our scientific inductive logic by giving the following rule on each level? This is Rule S, which says an argument of the form n% of the observed x's have been y's, therefore the next observed x will be a y. And the suggestion is that this gets assigned an inductive probability of n over 100. Then, if we have an argument like the one before, which said all ravens observed in the past have been black, therefore the next observed raven will be black, or if we phrase it to fit Rule S properly, 100% of the observed ravens have been black ravens, therefore the next observed raven will be a black raven. Rule S assigns this argument a probability of 100 over 100, which is 1, which is what we expected. Similarly, an argument that said 90% of the observed ravens have been black ravens, therefore the next observed raven will be a black raven, gets assigned an inductive probability of 90 over 100, or 0.9. Now let's pause here for a quick question. Now, unfortunately, Rule S doesn't turn out to be adequate, as a little thought will show. The most straightforward problem is that it doesn't apply to arguments of any old form, only of this really specific form that we're considering here. Consider, for example, the following 2 arguments. 60 ravens have been observed, 90% of the observed ravens have been black, therefore the next observed raven will be black. And this argument, 6 million ravens have been observed, 90% of the observed ravens have been black, therefore the next observed raven will be black. Now, scientific inductive logic should be able to assign inductive probabilities to these 2 arguments, and in assigning these probabilities, it should be able to take into account that the first premise in the second argument involves a much larger body of evidence than the first premise in the first argument, right? We're talking about 6 million ravens in the second argument, but only 60 ravens in the first argument. But Rule S can't do that, and what's more, it can't even assign the probabilities to these 2 arguments in the first place, because neither of these arguments are of the right form. And if we try and alter the form of the argument that we gave in the definition of Rule S, we end up losing track of the distinction between 60 ravens and 6 million ravens. So here's another shortcoming of Rule S. Even if we have 2 arguments to which Rule S does apply, it still doesn't assign the inductive probabilities that we ought to want. So here's one argument of the form that Rule S applies to. It says 100% of observed humans have been featherless, Therefore, the next observed human will be featherless. And here's another one. 100% of Castle Rock episodes Tom has watched have been viewed while Tom was in California. Therefore, the next Castle Rock episode Tom watches will be viewed while Tom is in California. Now, if we apply Rule S to these arguments, we get an inductive probability of 1 for each one of them. But it should be clear that the second argument has a lower inductive probability than the first, right? I could be anywhere when I next watch Castle Rock. So this is bad news. And what's gone wrong here is that we feel perfectly fine projecting the observed regular connection between humans and their having no feathers, but we feel that the observed regular connection between me watching Castle Rock and me being in California is something like a coincidence that shouldn't be projected into the future. So in this vein, we call the observed regularity in the premise of the first argument on that last slide projectable, while the observed regularity in the premise of the second argument from the last slide is not projectable. So scientific inductive logic does project observed regularities into the future, but only projectable regularities. Now we've seen this term projectable through the use of an example here, and in the discussion assignment I'm going to get you to write down a strict definition like we've seen before in lectures of the term projectable. That's why I haven't labelled it with a definition as such here, because it's for you to have a think about. But this slide should help with that question. So what have we seen? We've seen Rule S does assume that nature is uniform and that the future will resemble the past, but only in certain respects. It does assume that observed patterns in nature will be repeated, but only certain types of patterns. And so Rule S is not adequate for scientific inductive logic because it's incapable of taking into account differences in projectability of regularities. And indeed, it should be clear by now that projectability is not simply a yes or no affair, but it's a matter of degree. Some regularities are highly projectable, some are only kind of projectable, somewhere in the middle, and some are just not projectable at all. So we'll talk more about just how unprojectable a regularity can be next time, where we'll look at Goodman's paradox. So finish off with your self-reflection and I'll see you all next time.